You're walking along a shoreline. It's early morning, maybe 10,000 years ago. The water is calm. You can smell wood smoke from a camp behind you. Then you hear something, footsteps, moving fast from the reeds on your left. You don't know it yet, but you're standing in what may be the earliest crime scene of human warfare ever discovered. Here's the disruption. In 2016, University of Cambridge paleoanthropologist Marta Mirazón Lahr excavated 27 human skeletons at a site called Nataruk, near Lake Turkana in modern-day Kenya. 12 of those skeletons showed unmistakable signs of violent death. Crushed skulls, arrow wounds, one body found with its hands still bound. Radiocarbon dating placed the deaths at roughly 10,000 years ago, thousands of years before the first cities, before writing, before anything resembling a nation. This discovery is going to change the way you think about how far back human violence actually goes. For most of the last century, anthropologists leaned on what's called the peaceful savage model, the idea that early hunter-gatherers were mostly cooperative, sharing resources, rarely killing one another in groups. Nataruk challenged that model directly. Let's look closer at what Lahr's team actually found. The victims weren't farmers defending stored grain. They were foragers, living near a lagoon that, 10,000 years ago, was thick with fish and wild game. Embedded in the bones were obsidian blade fragments, a volcanic glass not naturally found near the site, meaning someone brought these weapons in deliberately. 2 skulls bore fracture patterns consistent with blunt force blows, likely from clubs. This wasn't one person snapping in anger. It had the shape of a coordinated attack carried out by a group against another group. But here's where it gets stranger. Climate records from that period show the region around Nataruk was in a wetter phase, meaning food and water should have been relatively abundant, not scarce. That detail breaks the usual explanation for prehistoric violence, which is almost always drought or famine. Lahr's team proposed something else. This may have been a fight over territory itself, a resource-rich lagoon worth defending, or worth taking by force even when there was enough to go around. That's not the whole story, though. Nataruk isn't alone. In the 1960s, archaeologist Fred Wendorf excavated a burial site called Jebel Sahaba in modern Sudan, dated to around 13,000 years ago, nearly 3,000 years older than Nataruk. Of the 61 skeletons recovered, at least 41 showed evidence of violent injury. Stone projectile points still lodged in bone, and healed fracture patterns suggesting some individuals survived earlier attacks only to be killed later. Some researchers, including a 2021 reanalysis led by Isabelle Crevecoeur at the University of Bordeaux, now argue Jebel Sahaba wasn't a single battle at all. It may represent repeated, small-scale raids carried out over generations. If that's true, the picture shifts. This wasn't one chaotic afternoon of violence. It may have been something closer to a slow-burning conflict, passed down and repeated, long before anyone had a word for war. Except there was a problem with taking any of this at face value. A skeleton can show you a wound. It cannot tell you why that wound happened. In 1996, Harvard primatologist Richard Wrangham published research comparing this kind of human violence to behavior he'd spent years documenting in chimpanzees at Gombe, Tanzania. Small coalitions of males conducting silent boundary patrols, sometimes killing males from rival groups. Wrangham argued this pattern of group-coordinated killing might trace back roughly 6 million years, to a common ancestor shared by humans and chimps. Not every researcher agrees. Anthropologist Douglas Fry, who has studied dozens of modern nomadic forager societies, pushes back hard on Wrangham's timeline. Fry's data shows that most documented violence among hunter-gatherers looks less like organized warfare and more like personal disputes, an argument over a theft, a woman, a grudge that escalated into a single killing, not a coordinated group attack. In Fry's view, war, in the true sense of sustained, organized group conflict, might not stretch back millions of years at all. It might only be a few thousand years old, arriving alongside settled life, stored food surpluses, and property worth defending. That disagreement has never fully resolved. Nataruk could be evidence of true ancient warfare. It could also be one catastrophic, unrepeated afternoon. Jebel Sahaba could be decades of raiding between rival bands. It could be one burial ground, reused across centuries by unrelated deaths. What both sites do agree on is harder to argue with. The capacity for organized, lethal violence between groups of humans existed at least 10,000 years before the first city, before the first written law, before anything resembling a government. Long before flags or ideology gave people a reason to kill, humans were already capable of sharpening a blade, walking toward a lagoon at dawn, and deciding that another group's presence there was a threat worth ending. You've never crouched in the reeds with a weapon, waiting for someone to cross an invisible line. But somewhere back along your ancestry, someone did. Not because they were broken or primitive or somehow less human than you are now, because the same mind that learned to share food, raise children, and build trust within a group also learned very early, long before history could record it, how to decide that another group of people was something to fear. That decision didn't begin with soldiers or nations or war as you'd recognize it today. It began with a handful of people standing near water, deciding who belonged there and who didn't.